when we first built it, we said, we're going to choose modern technology, all modern tools. On the one hand, you're like, oh, I have all this technical debt. And it's like, yeah, but you also probably have a lot of customers and money. If you have to say your name and then spell it every time you want to give it to somebody, it's like probably a sign that you should not call it that. We did everything to try to find a name. And then finally we just got to this day where Joel calls everyone in the kitchen and he's like, we're just going to vote and pick a name. And I was like, what do you think of Trello? And they're like, oh, hello, Jello. And I was like, do you hate it? And they're like, no, I don't know what it means. I'm like, perfect.
You're listening to the Enterprise Ready podcast, a show aiming to change the enterprise software narrative from how to sell to enterprises to how to build for enterprises. We'll interview industry experts and enterprise software founders as we break through the jargon, establish a common vernacular, and share the lessons learned from building the world's best enterprise software. Hi, I'm Grant Miller, creator of Enterprise Ready and founder and CEO of Replicated, where we power the world's best enterprise software. The Enterprise Ready podcast is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, or just learn more about enterprise features, find us at enterpriseready.io. In this episode of the Enterprise Ready podcast, we hear from Michael Pryor, the founder and CEO of Trello. Michael has had an incredible career as one of the founders of Fog Creek Software, which has spun out products such as FogBugs, Stack Overflow, Glitch, and of course, Trello, which was acquired by Atlassian for $425 million back in 2017. We cover a wide range of topics, primarily from the perspective of a bottom-up go-to-market approach. We start off with a bit of Michael's background and then dive into his perspective on naming products, approaches to user management and single sign-on, disruptive pricing models, and product assortment. I could have asked him questions for another 4 hours. We'll have to have him back on the show again in the future. Hope you enjoy the show. All right, Michael, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. So let's just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about your background. I know you started a couple companies, so just tell us what that's about.
So let's roll back the clock. 1998, I graduated from college.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I moved to New York City, and I thought I would just stay there for a little bit of time, but I met someone there at my job. His name was Joel. We were working at a company called Juno, which was like a free email provider. At the time, it was like competing with AOL.
Yeah.
It was like you paid to sign up for AOL. This was, you got free email, but we'd show you ads. So we worked at Juno for like 2 years. I met Joel there. He had come from Microsoft. And then like the whole tech scene was kind of like falling apart a little bit. People were getting fired and laid off, and it wasn't as fun. So we were like, hey, let's go do something else. And I was really young and naive and dumb and kind of privileged to be in the position I was in, you know, software developer in 2000. You can make a decent salary in New York. And
sure.
So I was like, sure, let's start a company. I don't know anything.
Silicon Alley, right, as they call it.
Exactly. Yeah. But it was like, it was all ad tech or finance. So like if you were going to start a company in New York in the software industry, if you were a programmer and you wanted a job, it was ad tech or finance. There were no pure software companies there. So Joel and I were like, hey, let's just start a real software company like they do on the West Coast, but we'll do it in New York because we don't want to move.
Cool.
So we did that. We started a company called Fog Creek Software. We didn't even know what we were going to build. We just started building stuff. In fact, the first thing we made was this CMS. It was like a desktop CMS at the time when Blogger and TypePad were coming. Yeah, so it didn't really... It was like the right like space, but we just delivered it in the wrong way. It was like, because at the time it was really hard to configure the web servers. You needed like SSH access and all this kind of stuff, and people didn't know what that was, but they knew how to type in their FTP credentials. So we built a tool called CityDesk that was a CMS. But right idea, wrong product, right time, maybe. Then we had this bug tracker thing sitting around, so we were like, let's sell that, and people started buying that. It was called FogBugs.
Yeah, it's cool. So you were using it mainly internally, and you decided to sell it, or how did that?
Yeah, Joel had built it before at like Viacom when he worked at Viacom. Then we used it at Juno. We called it Juno Bugs. So then when we used it at Fog Creek, we called it FogBugs. Worst name ever. And I actually think like the name actually had a really big impact on the trajectory of that product, because I think that the way people like connect with your product, that emotional branding and stuff is very important. I mean, look at Slack. Right?
Yeah.
There was HipChat before that, right? Atlassian HipChat. Like, there's lots of things that contribute to one product success, timing, all those kinds of things. But I think actually the brand and that sort of emotional connection of your customer to what the product is, and that carries through to the product itself and how you speak to them in the product. But I do think that the name plays a big important role in that.
That's cool. That's probably not a super common belief, right? Like that name really matters.
Well, I mean, people talk about the domain name, right? Like
Sure.
you want a short domain name, you want a .com, although now they're all taken, and like things like that. But I do think, it can't be hard to spell. Like I think we're past that era when you can, like Tumblr, and you just like leave off the E or something.
Yeah.
Like if you have to say your name and then spell it every time you want to give it to somebody, it's like probably a sign that you should not call it that.
Yeah, that's a good point. But what's one of the hardest problems in computer software? Naming, right?
Yeah. So we built FogBugs and started selling as bug tracking software. And about 2 years later, I'll come back to this in the story, these two kids in Australia made this program called Jira, and kind of were competing head to head with us. They were doing pretty good. We were ahead in the beginning because we had a little head start and stuff, but they were doing pretty good. So
that's funny.
And yeah, we built lots of things over the years. We built a screen sharing tool where you could like go to somebody else's computer where they were on the internet, and you just give them a code, and they would type it into a website, and you could see their screen.
Oh,
right?
cool.
Very common now. Log me in, go to my PC. But this was before that.
What was it called?
Copilot.
Oh, cool.
So like you could be my Copilot on my screen. That was a good name. But we didn't really invest in it. It was like the right time, the right product, but we needed to invest heavily in it. And the way we had built Fog Creek was we didn't take VC. We weren't trying to get big. We took a lot of the profits, gave them back to the employees. We didn't like hire a bunch of people, and obviously we were in New York, so like the salaries were super high and things like that. Like we weren't trying to find a place of like low cost, talent and sort of take
sure.
VC and double down and invest. And so we built features, but we basically invested alongside of our revenue growth. We were always profitable and those sorts of things. So anyway, we didn't invest heavily in Copilot, and those log me in and go to my PC kind of became huge things at the time. So we kind of missed that a little bit.
So FogBugs, you were selling to companies at that point?
Yeah, we were selling that. That was another revenue source that we had, and it was doing great. As time went on, like Jira just started becoming more and more of a thorn in our side, or a standard, or, like they just were getting more and more of the market share, and they just were doubling down on the features, and it just took off really in a big way.
Yeah.
So if you fast forward to 2010, Joel had always had this idea that the Q&A site for programmers online was called Experts Exchange.
Oh yeah.
It was just so evil. They would put the answers in the page so Google would see it, but like when you went to it was like really hard to find the answer. You didn't know, you had to scroll all the way to the bottom or something. It was just kind of janky, and then they would make your company pay to get access to the answers. And we thought that was kind of just a jerk move. To like, other people have written answers to these questions, but you have to pay for it. Like they own this knowledge, essentially, So anyway, Joel was talking to Jeff Atwood at the time.
They also didn't do a great job with naming on that one either, right?
No, yeah, Experts Exchange. Yeah.
Misread that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to like write it down. Make sure you write it down. Tell someone else to spell it.
The right place. Yeah, exactly.
So we were talking to Jeff Atwood at the time. He had a blog called Coding Horror. Joel had his blog called Joel and Software. So they had like big followings, and that was primarily because they had spent 10 years writing about software at a time when no one else was, and blogs didn't really exist. So they had, at that time in 2010, if you tried to start writing a blog, or even today, it'd be like, good luck. Like, right. I mean, there's a lot of people out there talking. And so it's much more difficult. But at the time, Joel and Jeff had just this huge audience that they could seed this network with, right? Because if you're going to do a Q&A site, you need the questions, you need the answers. So you need the people to be there on day one. Like if you just get there and there's like 5 questions, you're going to be like, it's dumb, right? People are going to ask dumb questions and stuff like that. So they built Stack Overflow. It was sort of a joint venture between Fog Creek and Jeff, and it took off. We almost made a mistake. We had been in the business of building software and then selling it, so we thought we would have other people build Q&A sites on top of the engine that was Stack Overflow for any kind of topic. So the idea was we built this Q&A engine. We ran it for programming questions to Stack Overflow, but we were like, we'll charge you $10 a month, and you can run your own Q&A site about motorcycles.
Sure.
So we ran a beta, and we had people doing that. But the problem is, like, the only way a Q&A site works is if you have the people.
Right.
So you need the audience. So there's only like a small number of people that could get the audience size to the point it needed to be. Plus, you wouldn't want to have like 10 sites on motorcycles, right? You want the one Q&A site on motorcycles. So like that meant that this business model that we had thought up where we would sell the software was actually the wrong business model.
Sure.
The valuable thing about Stack Overflow was not the software itself. It was the audience that had gotten there. So the software contributed to that.
I mean, the software was really well done. I think if you think about the comparative, solutions at the time, Yahoo Answers or the other things, like Stack Overflow is like a really, really great way to do Q&A.
Sure, but in and of itself, that wouldn't have done it,
Agreed.
Right? Like that wasn't what made Stack Overflow so valuable.
Right.
It was the fact that all the programmers were coming there every single day to ask questions, to get answers, and those sorts of things. So we almost made a mistake. One of the partners at Union Square Ventures came and talked to us and was like, I kind of feel like you should think about this. And we were like, oh, that's kind of smart. And we decided to take an investment from them. And that was the first time we took VC.
Oh, cool.
Because we realized we actually did need to build a giant, we need to get there first if we wanted to build these networks, right?
And so you split Stack Overflow
out
off
of Fog Creek.
Okay,
yeah.
so it became its own company, independent.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's different taxation issues and legal issues about how you might do that and how it's set up and all those kinds of things. But we've spun it off. And so Joel became the CEO of that company. I did operational stuff. So I guess by process of elimination, I was the CFO. I have no finance background. But technically, if you look back in history, I was the CFO. That meant I ran payroll and did all the filed taxes. We opened an office in London, so I did all that stuff. It was all business operations type stuff. Anyway, we still had Fog Creek, so I was running that. Joel was doing that part-time.
So you were running Fog Bugs? Because that was pretty much the primary product.
That was the bulk of the revenue, yeah. But we were still building things.
What was the team size? What was it like? Were you like...
I feel like we had about 30 or 40 people.
Did you think about it as enterprise software at that point?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
It was hosted or on-prem? I don't remember.
It was both.
Okay, so you could do both.
So we had made the leap to the cloud and had rewritten a bunch of things in Ajax, so it was single page type
cool.
of. So we had been developing it. There was a lot of technical debt early on. We made decisions which helped us from a business perspective, but long term were more problematic from the code, what we chose as our technology and that kind of stuff.
Yours was always a Microsoft shop, right?
Yeah, and so we had written some code to actually, so we could still write in a quasi language like ASP, which was a Microsoft language, but it would convert it to PHP and stuff like that. And over time, as we added more and more to that, that meant that we had a more peculiar homegrown solution. So it was a good business choice because it meant that we could ship to market really fast. But then over time, there were better solutions on the market, and the new developers were like, why would I
went Rails?
Yeah. And so you kind of end up in that weird situation where you're you have to sort of pay down the technical debt. And I think about that a lot when I think about Trello. We made a lot of decisions when we first built it. We said, we're going to choose modern technology, all modern tools. We're not even going to try to make it work on old browsers. We're going to choose cool new stuff. Some of those decisions worked out really great. One of the things we chose Mongo. But at the time, this is in 2011, Mongo wasn't anything.
Yeah.
Right? And that company and the product grew over time. Got VC, they had more developers. They basically, and they were growing essentially in tandem with us. So that turned out to be a really good choice.
Yeah.
If you replay the clock, Scott and Mike, the Atlassian founders, chose Java to build Jira. And we chose, the first iteration was in active server pages, but then more .NET type of stuff.
Sure.
And I think it's interesting because those technology choices can have this profound effect later on because you might have to pay a lot of technical debt to rewrite something, whereas this new startup does not because they start on this new tech stack. But even then, Trello, the new thing, if you fast forward 10 years and you're we wrote everything in CoffeeScript and no one wants to use it anymore. So we had to decaffeinate all our code is what we did. Things like that where, we didn't React is super cool now and we didn't build it in React. So we had to start doing that. We had to run a big project internally where we were writing pieces in React, but pieces in our old code base and running them both simultaneously so that we didn't have to do a whole complete rewrite.
I think the joke with JavaScript stuff is it's you turn your back and it's there's a new framework that everyone's using, right? So it's a very hard ecosystem to stay on the latest and greatest with, So Node was fine, Mongo was fine. We did a couple things that ended up being okay choices as time went on. But I just think about that, how on the one hand, you're I have all this technical debt. And it's but you also probably have a lot of customers and money, right? Whereas the startup that just started, of course, they can choose the modern framework. They don't have any of that technical debt, but they have no users, right? So
6 one way, half dozen the other. But anyway, so we were at this point where Atlassian really had cornered that dev market, and we weren't seeing a lot of growth in FogBugs. And we were like, it wasn't as exciting anymore either. So we kind of were trying to think, how do we reach an even bigger audience? Like, we're writing software for developers. Then we just had done Stack Overflow. We're like, what if we wrote something that just could have a much bigger impact and reach more people?
But Stack Overflow at this point had pretty good reach, right?
Yes, but just among developers. So that was cool. You could go to a party, and if there was like a developer there, you'd be like, yeah, we built this thing called Stack Overflow. And they'd be like, oh, that's awesome, right?
Yeah.
But we were like, wouldn't it be cool to make something where you could go anywhere and talk to people about it? And they'd be like, oh, that's awesome. So a couple things happened at the same time where we were looking at FogBugs at this sort of mental model of like a giant tracking database type thing, and then looking at what people actually did at work, and they'd be like sticking Post-it notes up all over the walls and trying to like understand that, because we had FogBugs internally to track our own, working on FogBugs, but yet the developers, if you look in their office, they had Post-it notes, yeah. And it's because they were going up a level. They were like two things. One is the database was just like too detail level, right? So it's more like, what am I working on right now? So Joel had this idea that he wanted to build a thing where everyone had a to-do list, but you could only hold 5 things in it. So imagine a web page where your list and then my list, and they're all next to each other, but they only hold 5 things. And so you can kind of go to that page and see everyone's shit.
Sure.
And that's, if you think about that in your brain, you kind of see Trello, right? Which is also like a Kanban board and all those kinds of things. That existed at the time. Obviously, we didn't invent that. But this idea that we were going to take something that developers knew a lot about, strip away a lot of the developers type stuff like swim lanes and Gantt charts and those kinds of things. And just even the idea of tasks, right? Like in Trello, we have cards. They're not issues. They're not tasks. And this is intentional. Like, a lot of people use it to manage projects, but it is not I would not call it a capital P project management system. And that has a lot to do with like, how you brand it, how you talk about it. But it's also like in the product itself, like what is the nomenclature? How do people experience the product? What are the expectations for the way features work and those kinds of things? So we're building something super horizontal based on all these failures that we had in the past, like Copilot. Well, they're not total failures, but mistakes we had made along the way. We made a lot of different choices. Same with Stack Overflow. Like we took a lot of learnings and applied them to the new product. So for Trello, let's build on the new tech stack. Don't worry about the old versions of the browser. Like just go, forward in time. Is also
use some off-the-shelf stuff rather than trying to build your own little abstractions internally for everything, right?
Yeah. And also try to do it in a way that's very bottoms up, right? Like if people love the tool and they use it, it's free, then that's a huge moat, because the next startup can't give away their product for cheaper. Because we had gotten burned by Atlassian because we had a ton of small teams using FogBugs because we were pretty cheap at the low end. But they had a site license at the time. It was like $5,000 for your whole company for Jira. So they ended up with a lot of very big customers, and we ended up with a lot of small customers. And we thought that was protective because it was diverse. Like if we lost any given customer, it didn't affect us. But what happened was over time they could raise their prices and add new customers.
Yeah.
And they ended up doing this thing where they gave away Jira for 10 users or less.
Right.
It was $10 and they gave it to charity. So it was a really good, it was charitable. It was a good marketing thing.
Yeah.
But also what it did was it dried up the sort of interest in our product because now we were way more expensive. If we had lowered our price at that end, the problem is we would have cut off
your revenue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it was a very tough, place to be in. So that's why when we did Trello, we were like, let's do a freemium product and we'll give away a ton of value. We always said we'll get 100 million people using it. 1% will pay us $100 a year. Then we'll have a $100 million business. That was just for, to try to show the magnitude of what we thought we were doing. Yeah, so we built a tool that people loved and they started using it. And we made a bunch of mistakes along the way in Trello. We almost named it Planety because we couldn't come up with a name. We had an internal name called Trellis because it was like the code name when we went to work on it. And we thought, it kind of gives a structure to something you're working on. So we called it Trellis. And people liked that, but then we couldn't get the domain name, and we had to launch. And so we were going to be at a conference and launch it.
Yeah, you launched it like a TechCrunch thing.
Yeah,
right?
so we had an actual deadline.
Yeah.
And we did everything to try to find a name. We bought name lists. We went everywhere. And then finally we just got to this day where Joel calls everyone in the kitchen, and he's like, we're just going to vote and pick a name. And like, crowdsourcing your name is the worst. So that's why we ended up, like, we always had a mascot. So we had a mascot for Trello at the time, was this like manatee. And so people were like, well, you're doing planning and it's a manatee, so we'll call it Planetee.
Oh, you're going to spell it like manatee.
Yeah, Planetee, but manatee. Or maybe we changed the mascot to an aardvark, and Trello has cards, so we'll call it Cardvark. That was the runner-up.
Yes,
so we left the kitchen, and we were like, oh, we're going to call it Planetee.
Animal names were popular at that part.
I don't know. Time too. We definitely have a mascot. That's always a good thing for your product.
For swag.
Yeah. So we left the kitchen, and I was like, oh my God. This is like, I remember we had named our product Fog Bugs. And I was like, oh, I am not going to name this Planetee. Like, it's so bad.
Yeah.
So bad. And I went back to my desk, and Joel's like, you have an hour. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, we can't get the domain name. We've tried for weeks and weeks and weeks to do something different, and we just can't. And so I went to an instant domain search website and just started typing words. And, like, after 20 minutes, an ad came up for Trello. And I, like, went around the office, and I was like, what do you think of Trello? And they're like, I don't know, hello, Jello. And I was like, do you hate it? And they're like, no, I don't know what it means. I'm like, perfect. Yeah. Can you spell it? And they're like, Trello. I'm like,
perfect.
Oh, good. It's very short to type. So that's why we picked the name.
Do you still own Planetee.com?
I think we let them slide.
Oh no.
I think we built Trello inside Fog Creek, right? And then we spun it out after 2 years. We sort of self-funded it for a while with our own funds, and then we spun it off and took money from Spark and Index in 2014. But I think we still had the domain name, and then when we got acquired, I think we just stopped renewing.
Someone out there's going to
my license plate though says Planetee on it, because I thought that was funny.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the other mistake that we almost made was we were charging people. This is a common thing that people do when you first start out. You're like, oh, I'll charge people a flat fee, like $50 to use my product, but then it doesn't matter if you're a tiny company using your product or a big company. Like, people don't want to charge per user, because like that is, in a collaboration product, that is like a vector of growth. But for all intents and purposes, that's also a measure of value.
Yeah.
Like, a bigger company, more people are using it, more value. And at this point in time, everyone gets that.
Yeah, I agree.
So like making up your own weird like pricing scheme is always dangerous. And when you get to a point where people are just like, yeah, I get it. You pay for storage. You pay per user. Like, doing what the market has now accepted as normal is often very advantageous. You do not need to reinvent the wheel in that area.
Yeah, people always talk about pricing and trying to price for value in these concepts, or just price what the market expects.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's not some weird conversation every time the pricing comes up.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And then part of it's like, figure out a way to have a lower entry offering, and eventually something that you can charge people a lot more for. Even if you don't have it right away, having a vision for what that might be. That's what it's all about, right? So like, it's good. I think they should have like at least 2 pricing axes. So if you charge per user, but you have multiple plans. So for example, so that way, even if you have a company paying you for every single person at the company, there's still an option for that company to pay you more. Sure. You can have even more than 2 axes. Like if you look at Intercom, they have they made 3 products, and then it's sometimes you can get to a point where you just confuse people too much, and they kind of get annoyed because it feels like you're nickel and diming them. But Slack, Dropbox, Trello, it's like per user, and there's different plans. Yep. And the different plans have features, right? The funny thing, so back to the enterprise thing, the funny thing is always those plans they put in the enterprise tier, they always put like SSO. Oh, right, of course. Right? Because they know that that's like a trigger to get people to pay you the most. And I think about that, it's kind of funny because we're going through this thing with Trello. We have an enterprise product that has SSO in it. One of the things that Atlassian did, because they have so many different products, is we realized that we could actually offer the SSO piece outside of the products. So no matter how many products you use, you just pay once in a very low fee. So if you think about like Slack or even Trello today, if you want the SSO, you have to pay for the highest tier, right? And then you have to pay for all the people. So it's almost like the sticker shock in there is pretty high. Like there's not a way to jump into that. Sure. And one of the things that Atlassian did, because they had all these different products, is we offered this thing called Atlassian Access. And the idea there is
you pay once for SSO, and it doesn't matter if you're using Jira or Confluence or Trello or Bitbucket or OpsGenie or you're paying just once per user, and you get the SSO, the 2FA. You can enforce the 2FA. There's a lot of it's basically security of the account.
Sure.
Absent the product that you're using.
Oh, so. Is it like a global account that you have?
Yeah, there's an Atlassian. Trello's not on it yet, but we're working on making that transition.
And one other thing I think you guys, I remember from my use of Trello was, I remember using it and hooking it into Google, and then it showed all the different users. I hooked in the replicated account, and I'm an admin, so it showed all the different users. I could easily click and invite them, which I thought was really well done. It was oh yeah, I want these people to have it.
Many different products do that now. I think Quip probably does that even better than we do.
Oh really? Okay.
Because they do a thing, I think they keep that around, so that when you're in the product, you can invite the other people, even though they don't have an account yet, and they just pop them. They pop that in. It's almost like they're pretending the person is there.
You can at them.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
So so they create a shadow account that then someone can come in and activate if you want to have them activated. That's actually great. Yeah. That's a great idea.
So it's not only at this moment that you sign in or start your team. It's just sort of
as you're using it.
Yeah, and you might add more people, to your G Suite database later.
Of course.
So that's gets into the virality of how you bring people in and those sorts of things. And those products out there, if you look at any collaboration product, they're doing cool things. So Trello does a bunch of stuff, but Quip and even our competitors, you look at Asana, but also Dropbox is a nice one. Dropbox is interesting because they have this nice you might use it for yourself, but then you also use it at work.
Right.
All right, which is a thing that happens a lot with Trello too,
yep.
And they do a pretty good job of kind of making that really compelling and obvious. And I think they're also very much in the position of a bottoms-up thing where people might just, from a consumer perspective, they might sign up for a Dropbox account and use it, and then Dropbox can kind of look and say, oh, there's 52 people at Atlassian using this. Are you sure you don't want to buy the company account and everyone can use it? That kind of thing. So, which I think from Trello perspective might be interesting to your listeners, but that's one of these routes where you have a tool that is much more kind of adopted at the individual team level, and it's not a tool that's only going to be used at the company level.
Right.
So if you think about Workday, for example, Workday you can't adopt Workday with your marketing team, right? You have to sell to the CIO or the COO or the CEO
HR person or whoever.
Yes, exactly. And so you might be building an enterprise product from that perspective, and then the challenges there become the Salesforce challenge, right? Because you have a really long sales cycle, you have to do all the typical enterprise sales, and it's hard to find those customers. You have to sell them the product because they're not currently using it. So you have to find the problem that they need. You have to demo it. You have to get it, get an introduction, whatever. You have to do all that stuff. With the other tools like Dropbox or Trello,
the bottom up sort of
bottoms up. Yeah. People are getting value. You have plans where people can whip their credit card out and pay for 10 people at their company.
And you might even pay that just because you're I want to use a great tool in my team. I make $200K a year as a VP here, and I want to have my team on a great piece of software where you can all collaborate. So you don't care about the cost. You're I'll pay a couple $100 a year to let us use this tool.
And the enterprise play there is usually then you find a specific domain is using a lot of your product, whether it's free or paid, and then you kind of try to find the person to bring that all together. That's a different challenge, right? Because it could be the person appropriate for that decision isn't the person using your tool, and you don't have that sales force. So you don't have somebody that's going to do field sales. They're going to go out and talk to the CIO and take them out golfing or whatever. You don't have that. So how do you do that from the perspective of Trello or other bottoms-up tools?
Yeah, I'm interested. When you think about the go-to-market from Trello, right? So a lot of times on the open source world, what happens is people will look at who's using the product on the open source side and who's creating issues and things, and then they'll have a top-down sales force go out and get them.
Right.
So how did you approach that at Trello? Did you have a sales team?
Yeah, I think initially, so the initial way that we first did the enterprise product was I hired somebody I'd worked with that she had done sales before for us. And then I hired her back
at Fogbugs?
At Fog Creek, yeah. And then she went somewhere else. And then I hired her back when we got funding. I hired her as a VP of sales. And I said, I don't have a product, an enterprise product. I have a paid product. I don't have an enterprise product. I was like, just go sell it. She's like, but what is it? And I'm like, you tell me. And I was like, just go sell, a handshake and a hug. And
we can
see
build
what you got.
software, so tell us what else we need to build.
So she did. She went out there, was like, I'm selling our enterprise product, which comes with an account manager, me, and, like that kind of stuff where you just start out there. And then we learned, obviously, you have the EnterpriseReady website, which just like details these things that you have to build. SSO, kind of like account management, that type of stuff. It's like top of the list.
Yeah, for sure.
And you just build out those things, and then essentially that's the expectation of the buyer, and that's what we did.
Okay, so you didn't even really have like a business offering per se.
We had Trello, which had some admin controls over your team, but when we were thinking about enterprise, these were like a different tier, right? Yeah. This isn't 10 to 50 people. This is like 50 to 10,000 people, right? We didn't even have anything in the product per se, right? Like we had to build pages and things like to sort of show them that. And I think in Trello's case, it's a little bit more difficult. As you think about Slack, they kind of had this problem too, because you would make like little Slack instances for your team. Like you could be the marketing team, you can make a Slack instance. And then you might even say, oh, well, the whole company can use it. And that works for like 100, 200, 300, probably 400 or whatever. You get to a certain size where the Slack instance kind of starts breaking down. And now you need multiple instances, which is their enterprise grid thing.
Enterprise grid, yeah.
Yeah, so they had to invent that, right? They didn't have that. And the problem with enterprise grid was if you stitch together all these sites, well, in each of those sites, you have an account. But you're the same person across all those things, but you might have used a different email or a different password for each one. So the authentication part that's a really hard problem to solve because you start from, if you started from there, if you started like, I'm going to have a grid and then built down, you'd be fine. But that's not how these products work, right? You build a thing and then you realize, oh, now I have to layer this on top. So in Trello's case, if you think about Trello, it's just a network of users, right? There's no site. There's nothing that wraps people into a place. Like you don't go to nike.trello.com. You just go to trello.com, you log in. And so finding those other people and the content around that is sort of up to you to put those in a specific place. But there's not really a wall around the people or the content implicit in the way that it's designed. Now that helps us on the collaboration side. But when you get to the enterprise layer, that's what they want. Right? They're like, I know everyone in my company is using this product, and they're like, I really want to know that I have the peace of mind that, like, when I am sharing a board with Joe Smith, it's the Joe Smith that works at my company, not this other random Joe Smith. And when Joe's doing things in Trello, that Joe doesn't just invite somebody else in,
his mom on accident.
Yeah, exactly. Like like they just want that peace of mind that they kind of know that they can kind of put up a kind of fence or a wall around it and just say, okay, all the content's in here, all the people are in here, and they're doing that thing.
This is interesting because I think that there's two approaches to user management, right? And I think GitHub and Trello did it in a similar way, which I call it user-centric, right?
Yes.
Versus like you think about like Google, it's like company or account centric, right? So it's like, so you have one account on Trello, and then you could have your personal stuff attached to that, and you can have your work stuff attached to that, right?
Yeah.
And so you have like a global user, whereas like other places you might just like have multiple accounts to sign in and out.
The thing though that we did where you just might have one account though, I think is a mistake.
Okay.
So when we looked at it, actually, people might use the same account, but I think the standard now when you look at Google is you have an email address, you have a personal email address, you have a work email address, right? And you just switch between them to get your stuff.
Yeah.
And I think everyone gets that, right? Yeah. That's the way Dropbox works, and I think that's how Trello should work too. We don't have that today because we don't have an account switcher, but that's ideally where we should get because it just avoids a lot of confusion around these things, even if you're not talking about enterprise, right? Even in the case of, just what you're doing at work. And if you don't care, then fine. Like if you're using your replicated account and you've got your travel board on there, who cares, right? Yeah. Like you don't care, so fine. It doesn't matter. But it is the expectation that people are like, I have an email address that maps to my account, and that's how I set my identity. Like that is even though I'm the same human, I want to be able to log into this app with that email address. And then I want to use a different email address to log in for my other shit.
Yeah, there's also some amount of like user makes them more comfortable because they're like, oh yeah, my personal Trello account is not associated with my work. I can like keep my personal.
And you don't
stuff
get a notification from your mom about Christmas presents, and then your boss about the thing. You know what I mean? Like that's the problem when you have these accounts. And of course, you could build stuff into the app, so it's separated your notifications by whether you put this board in a different place or whatever. But it's just, everyone just gets the account separation at the top being driven by your email address. It's just a standard now, right? You go to Google, you change it, you just get it. And then because that is the case, that is what we need to do, because that is the expectation.
Yeah. I mean, this is generally where Enterprise Ready came from as an idea, right? Was that like, look, there's these patterns that start to emerge that like, if you just embrace the patterns, then everybody kind of understands how your stuff is going to work. And,
That's right.
And some of these things, it doesn't make much sense to like reinvent.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not core to your product. We were talking about this before. We were talking about one of the features on there is audit logging.
Yep.
And if you know that you need to do audit logging when you build your product, like if you put the hooks in there in the beginning, you are going to be way happier, right? In the long run.
Your code in the
beginning.
Yeah,
and then it's going to be so easy. But audit logging is like, when I think about that problem, like we didn't build that into Trello. So when I think about it today, I'm like, I have to build like a whole interface to like search all your logs, and it's going to be all this data, and you have to build like fancy search because it's just just tons of data. You want it to come back fast. And I'm like, everyone uses Splunk for this now. And it's almost like today, if you want to do audit logging, you could just say, great, we publish all of our events to Splunk, flip this switch and give us your Splunk instance, and then that's how you provide that feature. And today, that would probably be fine for 95% of the enterprise companies you're going to talk to, because it just becomes a standard.
I mean, it's what they likely want to do with it anyway. They want to centralize all of the incidents and actions that have been taken in one place so they can search over it. So it's not like they have to and they can, if they want to just search the Trello ones, they just like make that a filter, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then you don't have to worry about like building all that filtering and search, which is clearly, like you think of it in the case of Trello, that is not core to the value prop that we do. So like spending time, like we have to implement that because that is the expectation of the company, but you want to do it in a way that puts your resources on things that differentiate you from other people, not rebuilding the wheel that's not actually going to drive the value.
Yeah, 100%.
It's like if you had reporting, right? You could build all kinds of crazy reports and stuff like that, and you might need to do at least some of that stuff internal, but at some point you could just say, how do I build a really good export to Excel or Google Sheets, right? Because that's what a lot of people just want to crunch numbers. And so if you have a really good Google Sheets integration, then that goes a long way, right? And you don't have to rebuild everything that, like, think about Google Sheets. They built filtering, formulas, and these are, like, as you start to go down that path of reporting, you're going to spend so much time building interfaces, and then you're like, well, now I have to do a filtering mechanism, and it's like, why write that code when you could just publish your stuff to Google Sheets?
Yeah, I mean, reporting is one of these features I feel like it's very underutilized, because I think about, from the perspective, I was actually just like at this conference yesterday, and this healthcare like CIO was just like, when are we going to have like my facilities I should have like data about my facilities. It takes them 2 weeks. I got to run some SQL query. I'm like, that guy just wants a report. And so if you can sell software to the people that like run his facilities that like generates a report or like produces a Google Sheet output, like that guy is going to be super happy about like that software.
But you don't have to build all the interface yourself, right? Like he just wants the job to be done, which is take this data, get it in a format that I want. If that's you build a button to do that, and then you can build a schedule on top of the button so it sends you the email of the sheet or the link to the sheet or whatever every week. It's like, that's like 80% of the job.
Yeah, because realistically, you're probably not going to slice and dice the data the right way for them anyway.
That's right.
So you just want to give them some way to get access to the data to then produce it. Now, over time, I think it's important to watch what your users are doing.
That's right.
And so, like,
you can pull that stuff in, some of that.
And you're like, oh, this one report seems to be the thing that people get really excited about. Then you sort of build that in and maybe have a little dashboard, so it's easy. It services it easier to users.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I still think like the value of reporting is really like to let the person who is paying for your software to justify it, right?
Yeah, you want to make them like the hero.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
That's the value of reporting.
That word reporting, though, is so loaded. Like when I try to think about what that means, like we've thought about this a lot.
Yeah.
And we get into this on the product side, we get into a lot of the language that we use is not precise enough. So I think it's confusing because you might be talking about audit logging is a type of reporting, right? It's like
Yeah.
you might say, I want reporting at the access level. I want to know who logged in when, because somebody just took over an account and there's a breach and I need to follow them through the application and see what they accessed and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a type of reporting, right? Then there's the data, the content in your product and the reporting around that. Then there's the meta layer on top of that. Like if you think about, like in Trello, you could say, I want to report on how many cars move from one list to the next list or something like that, which is, it's like almost meta. Or who was visiting this board?
Right.
How often have people seen this board? When's the last time they came here? Or like things that might even be invisible today, sort of like surfacing them in reporting. But because it means so many different things, a lot of times we put it as a feature and you just say reporting, and it can mean like 14 different features, right?
Yeah. My suggestion is always to put it, advanced reporting in your enterprise plan, and then just work with your early adopter enterprise customer to figure out what they want, right? Yeah. To your point, like that's kind of how you guys started to figure out what the pool was on enterprise features, right?
Absolutely.
Work with early design partners who are excited about your product and want to use it. I think you start to see a similar set of requests.
So you do. I also think, though, that sometimes you can get an enterprise customer where they're just a special snowflake, and then the problem is that the things that they want are really unique to their business. And because you're small and they pay you money, a lot of money, your interests aren't aligned, essentially.
Yeah.
And you do all this stuff, and it turns out nobody else wants that particular thing. And so it's hard for you to...
It's like NRE, right? Non-recurring engineering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard to back up and be like, you know what, it's okay. I can't build this for you because it's specific to what you're doing, or I have to build it in a more generic way so other people can get into it. So
from my perspective, it's like you take note of what everybody wants and you spend time and you understand it and you say, what are you really trying to accomplish with that? And you kind of dig in a little bit deeper. You try to ask why a little bit more. And then eventually you figure out if this is a very specific, and hopefully there's part of the other goal for EnterpriseReady is a common vernacular of all the different features people might be asking for. So if they're asking for some, changes to the overall workflow of how your tool works, maybe that's not how you want to do it, right? That's kind of a core product decision. But if they're asking for some kind of single sign-on, right? Unless it's some PKI system that they invented in-house, if it's SAML, if it's Google sign-in, these are pretty standard things that you should probably be doing.
Sure.
But that's what we're doing. As a product owner, your job is to intake all the feedback.
Yeah.
And then build the thing that the market wants. That's the challenge of what we do. So let's talk a little bit more about Trello now, because obviously you had a great acquisition by Atlassian, and so now that's how long ago was that?
2 years.
Oh my gosh, 2 years! Yeah. Time flies. So tell us a little bit about how things are going inside Atlassian. What's the what's been the change in terms of product or features or integration?
Yeah, I mean there was a lot of alignment around values. Fantastic company. We just actually released a document that kind of open source some of the M&A terms.
I saw that.
You saw it.
Really good.
And I think my one concern was founders aren't going to understand why this is such a big deal until you've been through this, because the problem is you go through it and you discover all this stuff and it's super opaque. You don't know what it means. You don't know if it's fair. It's super emotionally taxing. And being on the other side of it, I could tell you, if you're lucky enough to go through an acquisition, this document is super helpful because it cuts away a lot of the crap that you might have spent time worrying about or arguing about, and it's just not important. It's a hard process, I think, because you have to do it alone. Most of the people on your team, on your company, don't know you're going through this, and sometimes these things don't work out, right, or whatever, and then there's a lot of data requests, and it's just 6 months or a year of pain, a little bit, trying to get through that. But the fact that Atlassian did this is a demonstration of particularly why we did this acquisition. The people there are awesome. I love it. We're doing great things. We're able to do what we need to do for Trello. And so I can look at things like the Atlassian Access, which is the SSO product I was talking about before, and I'd be like, this is awesome, because it's unfair to force customers to have to pay $20 a user if all they need is this thing. We can do this across all these products and be in this one position where we could deliver you this account level security, and we could still have premium packaging for our product that has product specific value, right? But at this account level, it's you don't care if it's it could be Slack, it could be Dropbox. You're just sort of like, I just want SSO. So that's where we start to sort of see opportunities for us to kind of deliver value because we're part of a bigger organization.
It's cool. I imagine that there was, back to sort of the, fog bugs days.
You got the word right. You got the name right. That's good.
Yeah.
You're like fog bugs.
Yeah, nailed it. Yeah.
And it's spelled with a Z.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, with a Z. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Buzz. Yeah. Bugs. But like that's sort of a little, I'm sure that felt a little bit interesting to be.
Oh, that part of it. Yeah. That was super weird because, from our perspective, Joel and I, like, we didn't really know the founders super well. Mm-hmm. So our experience was, wow, this is somebody just like, kind of, it's like always like in the same place we all. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like winning in a big way, right? Yeah. Like, who would have thought that bug tracking could be a $30 billion business? Like, you'd be like, whoa. And so that was definitely an interesting component to it. And then meeting them and talking to them, and they're just great people.
Yeah.
Like all the Atlassians, it's an awesome team. And I love the people I work with on the wider leadership teams, and they've done at least, I don't know, 20. I guess in the article that we said the other day, they did like $1 billion worth of acquisitions. But I feel like they've done, maybe like 24 different acquisitions.
Yeah, they've really built that business. I think Confluence was an acquisition, right?
No, I don't know. I don't think maybe it was. Well, HipChat was, Bitbucket was.
Right, Bitbucket definitely was.
Then we got OpsGenie recently. Jira Align was another thing. They're still doing it. And it's great because it's like every time we do it, we learn, we iterate, we try to make it a better experience the next time. It's cool.
Yeah, the open sourcing of a M&A term sheet is a pretty big step. Like, I've never seen anything like that before. I've never seen that kind of transparency.
Yeah.
And like, that's so I went through, my first company was acquired, not for a lot of money, right? So like small acquisition, but it still took 5 months and it still was.
Oh, so some of this stuff, like the indemnity clause and all that kind of stuff.
And and you have no idea.
Is that a big deal? Is it not a big deal? Should I worry about this? Am I getting screwed?
The lawyers half the time don't know.
And the lawyers, they're, your lawyers are on your side, their lawyers on their side. And so like their job is to protect you, but it ends up being like a lot of headbutting for not like a lot of business value. You can't tell like which parts are going to matter and which parts are not. And so this document was just like, hey, let's just tell people what we're going to do, and it's fair and everyone can see it. And then we just avoid all that. And of course, there's still many other terms that you need to negotiate and understand in that deal, but at least you can take a lot of them off the table.
So in the VC world too, you raise money and do the M&A thing. There's all these different terms and like little tweaks, can make a big difference. And so sort of knowing what is market, like what is the thing that this is standard in these deals.
Do you remember when the VC deals used to be what was the
preference
thing?
And 2x preference?
Yes, exactly.
Participating preferred.
Participating preferred. And no one kind of understood it. And it wasn't until a while till the VCs were just like, okay, we're just doing 1x, they're not going to double dip. And everyone was like, oh, shit. Yeah. Like if you go back in time, you're like, if you were a person that was going through that, you wouldn't quite understand it until there was an exit. And then you'd be like, damn, they got a double dip.
Way more my company, yeah. I think the venture hacks, if you ever remember, so Naval wrote that with, I think, Nivy, before they started AngelList. And it was it was the only source of this information from like a founder perspective, right? Like, how do I do this? And so, yeah, that information is super valuable because you go through those transactions like a couple times as a founder. You go in M&A transaction, like maybe you go through once and then you learn a bunch of lessons about.
When do you go through it again, right? Yeah. And there's probably a lot less volume on the M&A side than there was on the investing side. Sure. Obviously, it's just like a tautology, I guess. If you invest in all these companies, not many of them succeed. How many get acquired is going to be a fraction of the total number invested. So the volume there for the audience for this is probably a lot less than, Series C form documents or the Y Combinator did and stuff like that. But I think it's kind of cool because we put it out there and then maybe other founders will see it. It's like, oh, some other company will buy it. It won't be Atlassian buying that, but you have some other company and you can kind of point to it and kind of say, look, they're doing this.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that might have not made the other companies happy.
Oh, no. Yeah, it definitely made some corporate development people really upset. They were like, "Why are they giving away the secrets?"
Exactly.
I think I heard that the price that you first get is half of what they hope you'll take. Is the
okay.
bit of knowledge that I was
That's
given. I was like, oh, that's good. That's a good way to understand how much you might actually be, potentially acquired for. So, so any other things on the enterprise go-to-market side now that you're part of Atlassian? Are you seeing bigger companies that are adopting it as part of this?
Oh yeah, so there's a lot of things like we did. Because we're part of a bigger organization, it's much easier for us to do SOC 2 Type 2, SOC 2 Type 1, SOC 2 Type 2, that kind of stuff. ISO 27K. Like just all those letters and initial things, right?
I always suggest reading the ISO 27001 spec is like 127 pages of very boring.
Yeah. You suggest for people to read that?
Yeah, of course. But it's great. It's like you read it and you realize that it's basically the playbook that every security person will ever bring. Like every question that you're going to get in a security review, you're like, oh yeah, I've read that. I know what the answer is.
And so that being part of a bigger organization is easier for that kind of stuff because you can just lean on a whole bunch of legal people.
They know the answer.
They can help you lead it through. And so we did all that stuff, which is awesome because now you can put it up on the website.
Sure.
GDPR was much easier I remember, I think you told me you read the whole GDPR thing and I was like, whoa, dude.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
This is one of my secret things. I just read all the stuff that everyone's afraid of.
Yeah.
And then you realize okay, it's
not that bad.
Lay in a hammock.
Yeah.
It's not that bad. I mean, I think I condensed it and I published a version on EnterpriseReady that was it's 34 pages, right? Of normal PDF stuff. So
I think a lot of that was made easier having support for that stuff because they're doing it for all the products. And so you're kind of oh, we've been through this. You might have to put systems in place for some of the SOC stuff. So we had done all that stuff as part of the acquisition. Things like HIPAA, FedRAMP, you start to try to figure out what do we need to do for all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
when you think about the enterprise stuff, I think that's a big deal. On the go-to-market side, from the sale, I guess Atlassian, they have sales, but it's not.
Yeah, they don't call it sales.
Yeah. But they do.
You can't. It's not sales. It's enablement.
Yes. It's sales. Certainly at the top level, at the bigger companies, cloud companies, So now we're in a position where it's hey, we can go in and we can, you're probably already using Jira. There's probably already people using Trello. There's probably already people using Confluence.
Yeah.
And so from a sales position, it's a little bit easier, versus you talk to some other enterprise founders and you can think about the case where, if I go back to what I was talking about earlier, where the salesperson has to go in and they have to actually sell the product. That's the good thing about the bottom-up thing. You don't have to sell the product per se. The people are already using it.
Right.
You're not going into a company and saying, hey, you guys should use Trello to do stuff. You're like, hey, did you know 6,000 people at your company are using Trello to get their shit done?
Right.
Of course, it changes the question because then they say, well, so what do I need to pay for? If they're using it, great. That sounds great. Everyone's using it. But, and just you care about the security of the content and that kind of stuff because it's, the Trello's built on collaboration. So it's very easy to collaborate. You might not want that. If you want that, then maybe you're right. But it's probably the case that you want more visibility about this stuff. If somebody leaves the company, you want to know that the data and the content stays within. It's shared with only the right people. And so that's what you build into the enterprise product to give the people more control over the accounts and over the content related to the accounts that people are using for work.
I mean, that was probably a direction you were already heading in when you were doing some of that before the acquisition, right? So these are things that were happening. I'm guessing that you've started to do more, enablement within your side to help the teams that are not doing sales, quote unquote sales, in the last.
They're doing sales.
Okay, they're doing sales. I don't know. But just to give them the things they need in order to, when they go into some large enterprise, they can sell the whole suite. Because one thing that I've noticed is that when you talk to an enterprise, the Atlassian stack or the Atlassian suite, however you want to think about it, they get pretty bought in, right? So they start using a lot of the different tools you guys offer.
Right, yeah. And I think the way that it's designed is you don't have to though, right? You start with Jira, you could start with Trello, and you could use these two things, but then they kind of, you add them on and they can kind of layer with each other. And
it's like your phone company, or it gets cheaper when you add more services.
Yeah, it turns out, that's the way it is with the access because you only pay once, and then, with the SSO, you're paying once. And so you add more products to it, you're actually saving money as you go across.
Yeah, it's somehow cheaper to use more.
It's interesting though, because nobody else kind of has that concept. So there is some education around that, because then the expectation of the customer can come in and they could say, wait, why do I have to pay extra for SSO? And you're like, no, you're not. You're like, you're not paying extra. You're like, I could take that money and tack it onto the price of the Trello package, right? But I'm not doing it that way. I'm pulling it out, right? So it's sort of like, how do you pitch it and explain it and market it can make a big difference so that the perception is what you are trying to do, right? If the perception is the opposite of what you're trying to do, you can sort of shoot yourself in the foot with some customers. Like, do you know what I'm saying? They could be like, I thought SSO was included, right? And then you're sort of saying, well, let me explain why. We're actually giving it cheaper, and you don't have to pay you could use Trello for free, for example, and you could still get the SSO. So it's just a different way of pitching it.
I mean, there's some interesting and complex pieces around having that suite, right? Most folks are going in selling one product, right?
And it's a little bit simpler. And a lot of times what they're selling is a site or something. Like it's like a URL. You're like Atlassian.workday.com or like Atlassian.slack.com or something. You go in and you kind of just sell it. It's very simple. So as you add more of those things, it's advantageous, but it also creates a little bit of a challenge of how you sell those things. There's more conduits for the people to show up and come into your customer base, essentially.
Yeah, because you guys have so many different products and ways for people to engage. I'm sure that you just get spread throughout organizations. And you're probably every company, in the Fortune.
That's why I tell
5,000.
When other people are going to talk to a customer, I'm like, just tell me who it is because I can tell you how many. Just so you know, so you're in the conversation. Tell me what the domain is so that you could be like, oh, did you know you had 4,000 people using Trello?
Yeah.
It's like a lot of times they don't. So.
Yeah, and then they're like, I wonder what we should do about that.
Yeah.
That's great. Michael, I really appreciate you being here. I wish we had more time. I could probably talk to you and ask you a million more questions about, your early days at Fog Creek all the way through to everything you've done. We barely tapped into any of the stuff you did at Stack Overflow, where I'm sure, there's some great lessons there too. But this has been great. I really appreciate all of your time.
Thanks for having me. I'll come back for part 2 later.
Perfect. I'd love that.
All right.
That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on this show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, or just to learn more about enterprise features, find us at EnterpriseReady.io. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com to check out the library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.